I'm going to point the camera away from myself today, for today is 9/11. This is the day where everything is backwards, and this is a day whose aesthetic, if you will, is high strangeness. I have to say, I don't know if I can exactly define what high strangeness is. I've heard it referred to many times. I think it's something like what they're going for in a lot of these new analog horror productions that you can find on YouTube. One of the more creative movements to come out of YouTube, aesthetic movements, if you will, is that aesthetic horror. Some of them are better than others, but what it seems they all have in common is there's the intention is to make you feel like things are not quite right, things are off, like this shouldn't be happening. This is like a do you wake or sleep? And if you're sleeping, from whence cometh this nightmare? And how can you wake from it? These are the kind of things that the aesthetic of high strangeness seems to involve. And I've done a lot of thinking about 9/11. I've written about it. I've spoken about it. I've expressed my thoughts on it. It was certainly a day that did change everything. It might have been the day that began to thrust us into the world where we find ourselves now. Although it was a slow slide into dystopia. But I'd say we're just about there. And 9/11 was not the day that it began, but it was the day that gave it a real kick in that direction. And of course, there's still the official story, which I think is still adhered to by many people. And when I come across somebody who still seems to believe the official story, it kind of makes me think of how there were two different kinds of responses to Queen Elizabeth II, her recent death. There's like an older type of conservative thought, which is marked by a belief in the institutions of our civilization, and it's marked by a respect and a reverence for those institutions. And for people like this, for this older type of conservatism, what made 9/11 so significant was it was an attack by outsiders They think, anyway. This is what they say. This is what they believe, and that's what the official story teaches, that it was an attack by outsiders upon our civilization. And and the same kind of people are the ones who express sorrow over the passing of the Queen. Now, I'm not saying that the Queen's death should have been a cause for celebration. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying to celebrate anyone's death, necessarily, unless we're talking about a tyrant, which I don't know if Elizabeth could be called that. As they say, the royal family is mostly a figurehead institution today. But still, what the Queen represented to this older type of conservative, and what 9/11 represents to this older type of conservative, is this sense or belief in and reverence for the institutions that our civilization was built on, and a belief that those institutions are still alive and can still be reactivated. And so there's that type of belief, and then there's I don't know if we could call it the new right or the postmodern right, or I know the word, I don't like the word postmodern, but I'm trying to think of a word that would be better suited. One that believes in civilization, that the quote that Gandhi was that's been attributed to Gandhi, where he's asked what he thinks of Western civilization, and he said, "I think it would be a wonderful idea." It's sort of a more cynical perspective. Well, not sort of, definitely a more cynical perspective. And it's one that's marked by an awareness of the high strangeness of things as they are right now, that we've slipped into this ghastly mode, and that our decline and fall continues unabated, which sounds very black-pilled the way I'm talking about it right now. I don't want to be black-pilled and say it's all over for, tyranny and the bad guys will rule forever. I'm definitely not saying that, but I am saying that those who had this kind of belief in, who had and still have this adherence to the official story of 9/11, that Western civilization was attacked by barbarians, if you will. You're not allowed to say that, I know, but that's generally what's being hinted at, by barbarians outside of the gates of civilization, whereas those with a different sort of understanding, those who have cut their teeth, if you will, on a very different sensibility, who've been raised with a very different sensibility, which is the sorry state of things, the corruptibility, the corruption of everything that was once held to be sacred, and the decline. Did I already mention decline? I don't know. I just woke up a few minutes ago. I'm just trying to get some ideas out there, because I still feel the need to commemorate this day with some words, for whoever's out there, whoever's actually watching, whoever's actually listening. I last year wrote a series of essays entitled 19 Arabs with Box Cutters, and I've republished those essays on my Substack channel for anyone who is interested. I think I'll just close my comments here, my semi-coherent comments. I'll close by talking about what I find really striking, and this is discussed in the final essay of 19 Arabs with Box Cutters, and that is the way in which certain stories that were circulated right in the aftermath of 9/11 just have been quietly dropped, and no one has acknowledged anything. No one has acknowledged how silly and ridiculous these stories were, but they've just been, oh well, we don't talk about that anymore. It's not brought up anymore. Like the day after 9/11, how they said they found out that an Arab hijacker must have been in the plane that ostensibly crashed into the tower, because they found his passport on the streets of New York City. Some federal agent, some Johnny-on-the-spot federal agent picked up that passport and said, aha, I believe we have the answer to the mystery. Ignoring everything that's ridiculous about that, ignoring the notion of a passport falling out of a plane that supposedly has crashed and exploded through a building, that a passport would just fall out of that plane and fall to the ground, the same way that passports were found at the site in Pennsylvania near Shanksville, where there was basically nothing there. It was basically a hole in the ground, and somehow we were sold on the story that the plane just vaporized, and that's why nothing was there, which is not consistent, of course, with anything, any prior plane crash. But anyway, the idea that these passports survive these crashes, that's just sort of been, nobody that I know of has followed up on that. Nobody's asked questions about that. Nobody's stuck a microphone into the face of whoever it was that was in charge of talking to the press at that time for the Bush administration, and said, how do you explain this? This doesn't make any sense at all. How do you expect people to believe this? Do you expect people to believe this? And the answer to that is clearly yes, they did, at least for a while. Now, more strikingly, and this is what I write about in my last essay, 19 Arabs with Box Cutters, and this encapsulates the high strangeness motif. just a few days after 9/11, Ted Olson, who held some post with the Bush administration, I can't remember what his title was. His wife supposedly died in one of the crash at the Pentagon, which also has a lot of anomalies and weirdnesses. I mean, everything about this event is anomalous and weird, and characterized by, saturated in high strangeness. But he gave this interview to Barbara Walters, the queen of sappy interviews, and it was supposed to be this. He told this heart-rending story of how she reached him with her cell phone, and told him what was going on, that hijackers had taken over the plane, and that she and the rest of the passengers and the pilot and the co-pilot had been all herded to the back of the plane as it was hurtling toward the Pentagon. And what can she do? And they told each other that they loved. She said she loved him. He said, "I love you too." And then the line went dead. He said she called him twice, and they talked for about 2 minutes the first time and 1 minute the second time, I believe. Well, that story was shown conclusively to have been to be impossible, because first of all, at that time, calling from a cell phone at that altitude was not something. Calling from that altitude to a place on the ground with one cell phone just would, from cruising altitude, it just wouldn't connect. And furthermore, the record showed that Barbara Olson had made one attempted call, but it had not gone through. And then people said, well, maybe it was the phones that they had in the planes at that time. But it turned out this plane that Barbara Olson was on, the one that allegedly crashed into the Pentagon, which strangely enough, even despite being the most fortified building in the world, put up no defense, just let some large object crash into it and kill a bunch of the people who worked there. That's one of the one example of the high strangeness. That's one absurdity, one 9/11 absurdity of probably hundreds. But anyhow, his story was shown, Ted Olson's story was shown conclusively to be a lie. He was getting on television with Barbara Walters, telling this story that was absolutely untrue. And the thing is, you can't find that interview. You wouldn't be able to find this interview anymore. And it was like this should have been an interview that reverberated through the years, because wow, what a story, at least that's how they were selling it. But now the only reason that interview can still be found on YouTube is because some 9/11 some organization that disputes the official story and posts things online that show how the official story can't possibly be true. They've put it up there. If you go on YouTube, and at least this was true as of last year, probably still true. If you go on YouTube and look up this interview, you'll find that it's posted by this particular group. It's not posted by ABC News. It's not like ABC has dropped it from their archives. You can't find it, in any official mainstream media archive. They've just, again, quietly stopped talking about it, just like they stopped talking about the miraculous floating passport. So, high strangeness. That's the world we're in right now. It's one of high strangeness. And 9/11 was what gave us a big, good kick in that direction, the direction that we've been drifting towards. We've been drifting towards dystopia ever since. And it's a dystopia of high strangeness. Those are my thoughts on this 21st anniversary of 9/11. Thanks for listening.